right, I think we're going to go for it. Thanks, everyone, for showing up this morning. Thanks, BSidesCharm, for inviting me and for a great past few days. I'm going to jump right into it. So welcome to my talk. This is titled 3 Bridges and a Compass. My goal for today is to give you all some very practical workflows for applying intelligence to security efforts. And along the way, we'll have a chance to walk through a new open source data set and tool that I recently had a chance to publish. It's live right now, and it's all geared around what I mentioned, trying to help organizations of pretty much any size at least think about how better to start applying intelligence to security. Real quick background, my name is Scott Small. I'm a senior threat intelligence consultant at Recorded Future, so I'm part of our customer success team. That means I'm out there having conversations with our clients, government agencies, large and medium enterprises every single day about intelligence and how it relates to security. So I promise that everything I'm going to touch on today is derived from these conversations that I'm having with folks out there in the field and seeing some of the challenges that they're facing in applying intelligence to security and hopefully finding a few kind of workarounds for making that a little bit more streamlined. A lot of what I'm going to touch on today involves the MITRE ATT&CK knowledge base. So I do really want to quickly level set with everyone in terms of what is MITRE ATT&CK, and I really want to kind of bring it down to earth a little bit. I know I will be the first to admit it's a bit of a scary and seemingly technical kind of framework or knowledge base, but if we had to most simply boil it down, the MITRE ATT&CK framework is simply a catalog of adversary behavior. Just to provide a little bit more detail, oftentimes you're going to see this knowledge base, this catalog displayed in one of these matrix views. This is just kind of a snippet of the overall matrix. But I was thinking last night, speaking with, having a lot of conversations around, the challenges and all the jargon that we use in the security field. So I just wanted to kind of simplify a little bit of what is the MITRE ATT&CK knowledge base trying to look at. Quite simply, when you look at this matrix view, the row at the very top are the end goals or objectives of what an adversary would be trying to accomplish. And then the ways or means that they go about trying to accomplish those goals are organized vertically underneath it. And I know this is really small text, that's kind of intentional. We'll get into the details of a few specific, as they're called, techniques, the columns arranged vertically here. But again, trying to simplify things, this is what this big kind of seemingly complicated knowledge base or matrix is trying to do. So yes, let's look at one specific example and talk about the application of MITRE ATT&CK, at least how I see it. I'm not going to get into the history and some of the original uses of the ATT&CK framework. It is used in a lot of different ways. Quite simply, the best use of MITRE ATT&CK, in my view, is for intelligence purposes. And we'll kind of talk through what exactly I mean by that with a specific example. So the technique that I've highlighted here on the matrix is called impaired defenses. It's got a unique identifier associated with it. It's quite simply describing ways that adversaries try to get around all of these defensive measures that we put into place. So there are a number of specific ways that they can go and do that. They can try to disable security tools that we've put in place, or maybe mess with some of our logging functions. I'm going to highlight as we go along some of my favorite resources too, just in wrapping my head around MITRE ATT&CK for intelligence. But to dig a little bit deeper, one of the benefits of having this referenceable catalog of adversary behaviors is we can point back and look at some of the specific ways, command line processes, programs that adversaries use to carry out this technique of impairing defenses. So what you're seeing listed out right now is a specific technique for turning off an open source ransomware, they call it like a vaccine or an antivirus program for ransomware. What I'm highlighting here is a search that you can run in a security tool. It's a SIM, it's Splunk, to try to detect that behavior of turning off the ransomware specific antivirus. In reality, we as defenders are not dealing with just a single behavior that we're looking at any given time. There are very many that we're potentially seeing scrolling across our feeds and throughout our SIMs. So this is a little bit more of the reality. The good news is that just like I highlighted, there are pre-configured, often publicly available searches that you can run across your data sets to try to detect these techniques. That same concept, in fact, applies for a large portion of the overall attack matrix. So this is also kind of intentionally jumbled because this is kind of the reality. We have all of these like detection rules that we could start to put in place to try to recognize all of these behaviors within our environment. So to wrap our heads around kind of starting to put this in place, in reality, you're going to have to tune a lot of these searches to your own environment. It's really not kind of typically a plug and play exercise. So to go about doing that, in reality, ultimately what we need to do is prioritize which techniques or adversary behaviors we want to drill in a little bit further to. We want to investigate and put in new detections in place. And end of the day, we're going to use intelligence to do that, and I'll talk about kind of how that works in just a moment. But when we start to do this prioritization, we can identify some good rules that we can put in place. Oftentimes there's multiple of them. We can start to tune those according to all the noise that we're seeing in our own specific environment. And then ultimately in the best case scenario, and I do want to emphasize this, if we put in some new detection rules, we're going to go about trying to test to make sure that they actually work as we intended to. Quite truly, it takes something as simple as typing one of those commands or searches in wrong into your SIM, for example, and you may not be able to actually detect the technique in place, even though maybe the underlying logic was all correct. So what you're seeing now, these are also publicly available resources. This comes from Atomic Red Team, produced by Red Canary. And what we're seeing here are some specific quick ways that you can go about testing attacker behavior within your own environment. The nice thing about everything you're seeing displayed here on the screen is all of this code contains tags that line up with the MITRE attack techniques that I'm highlighting, like in those blue cells there. So it's really easy to perform this alignment. We can look at defensive controls and even testing measures we can put in place, all kind of hinging on or revolving around MITRE attack. All right, just to elaborate, so within the matrix right now, there are nearly 600 discrete adversary behaviors or techniques and what are known as sub-techniques. What I've kind of been highlighting all along is also this fact that there are countless very specific ways that those techniques can be put into play. So you're seeing now this big list of what are known as sub-techniques. Even within those, there's tons of different specific ways attackers can carry out these behaviors. So again, it really is kind of emphasizing that some sort of prioritization is needed to be done. Just to give some metrics kind of around the scale of this problem, and a lot of this was, we took a step back and kind of did a review of all of these publicly available data sets with detection rules and tests that you can run. The ones that I've highlighted are just a small sampling of what's out there, publicly available for everyone. Over 9,000 specific detection rules that exist. I think the actual number is probably quite higher. These are just the things that you can find in the open source and are publicly available. And then using resources like Red Canary and organizations like Scythe, the Cyber Analytics Repository, they have, these are a number of different data sets that include tests that you can run within your own environment. We've got well over 2,000 of those that are, again, just available in the open source. So this brings me to kind of the three bridges of the presentation, and we're not going to be talking about these folks. I'd love to see someone give a talk with these three gentlemen on the screen, but what I'm going to instead be talking about are the three ways that intelligence can be used as a bridge to better improve security within an organization. So three quick ways. Number one, and this is again coming from the intelligence teams that I am specifically working with. I'm fortunate to be able to work with a lot of larger organizations that do have those resources to have entire teams dedicated to this. I realize that's not always the case, so I really want to be emphasizing kind of thought processes here. Even if you're a single individual who a small part of your job is keeping track of the trends, I do think these thought processes and concepts can absolutely apply to your day-to-day. So the first way that intelligence serves as a bridge is between the external and the internal environments. Most of the teams that I work with very much, of course, are keeping track of all the various actor groups and malwares that exist in the world today. But what they're oftentimes also being tasked with is being aware of the internal operating environment within their own organization. So is there some new big technology rollout or digital transformation being planned within their organization? They ideally, at least, should be aware of those factors because they very much can have an impact on the overall kind of risk picture that the organization is faced with. Second way that intelligence serves as a bridge is between the strategic and the tactical levels of the threat space. And this really actually is another key way that MITRE ATT&CK comes into play, because they have that higher level structure, that first row of what are attackers trying to do, but then also all those granular details about how are they doing it, down to the level of specific command lines and processes, all contained within this single framework. We can kind of go between those very high level concepts all the way down to how could I detect this on an endpoint within my environment? How could I go about unit testing that technique? And then the last way is kind of a blending of the two, but what I'm very much seeing right now and kind of seeing a ton of growing interest in using MITRE ATT&CK for intelligence purposes. These intelligence teams really are kind of perfectly situated to serve as a bridge between the offensive and defensive realms of security. So oftentimes kind of being looked at as a go-to, as an in-between between the red team operators and those defenders. And increasingly, I really am seeing intelligence analysts kind of being tasked with, or at least maybe a hope or expectation that they would be able to surface some of these detection rules and testing mechanisms that you could go about putting into place within your own environment. And so I am seeing kind of increased focus on that. And again, I think by their nature of keeping track of kind of everything that's happening, external and internal, these teams really potentially are in a good position to be able to kind of meet this need. And then just a couple specific tools that support all of these concepts. So we've talked a lot about MITRE ATT&CK. The other component of this is truly just our analytical brains as intelligence analysts. It really is kind of necessary we can do all this automation, and we should be doing automation around this, but to really kind of sit down, take that step back and think about how do these threats actually impact our organization, I really do believe that has to be kind of a human analysis component to it. All right, so I'm going to start to shift gears to this tool that we hope can aid organizations in applying intelligence. And where this is all coming from, I do want to kind of build up to what led to the production of this. A lot of this is coming from support that our customer success team is doing around threat or risk profiling risk or threat profiling exercises for organizations. And all I'm doing here is just highlighting some of the various factors that ideally should be included in a risk profile. Oftentimes organizations will, in a good way, start small and kind of focus in on one area of this. And what we've traditionally done is, being a cybersecurity intelligence company, we focus more kind of on the upper left-hand side with kind of building out a threat profile. What actors and malware exist out there and which ones would be most likely to target our specific organization. But what we would often see from there, we would end up, we would do all this work, we would run searches in our platform, come up with, a pretty cool looking picture like this. This is highlighting potentially the top actor groups that would target us. And then it kind of stops there. It's a nice picture to look at, but what exactly do you do with that information? Well, we started to kind of take the next step and say, we've identified some maybe top priority actors. Let's shorten it down to a short list of the top 5. What behaviors are associated with them? You can look at all the various behaviors they're using, see where maybe there's overlapping techniques that they're all using, and you come up with another nice graphic, which is highlighting, this is the MITRE ATT&CK matrix again, highlighting top like TTPs or behaviors associated with your top priority threats. What next? I've absolutely received that question in conversations with our clients. We're moving further along. We're saying that we have identified maybe top priority techniques. What do we actually do with that intelligence? That's kind of where this data set that we've produced has started to come into play. So I'm going to walk through a couple final examples, then start to kind of dig into the tool itself. So one of the literally next questions that I received after highlighting this heat map for a client was, what can we start to do with that? My next question back to them was, well, what tools do you have in place? What capabilities do you have to search within your own network and endpoint data to detect these behaviors? Fortunately, they were using a tool, a SIM solution like Splunk, and all of this is publicly available. I've highlighted the link back to this repository. Splunk produces these searches or queries that you can run within the SIM to be able to detect adversary behaviors. I know there's a lot on the screen right now. I'm not trying to overwhelm folks. Essentially what we're seeing here with the highlighted portion is code or logic that you can run within the SIM to be able to detect a specific instance of an attacker technique. And ultimately what we can do with this is highlighted down here at the bottom. These are the MITRE ATT&CK codes or identifiers associated with the behavior that we are ultimately trying to detect. So in this case, we're saying, let's look for instances of PowerShell being run. Let's look for specific event IDs and over maybe a certain kind of rapid time frame. That's what this specific search is designed to do. But ultimately, we can kind of line that back up with specific MITRE ATT&CK codes. This brings us to, if we zoom way out, Splunk provides, again, publicly available, well over a few hundred of these specific searches that you can go identify. And so it starts to kind of turn into a little bit of just a math game. So highlighting the MITRE ATT&CK codes on the left-hand side and highlighting just a roll-up account of all of the searches that they provide that are associated with those same adversary behaviors. So that's good to know. We've started to look at some operational ways that we can take this overall original intelligence that we've provided and start to kind of put that into use within our environment. One of the other things, though, in speaking with this client, is they let me know that they are also utilizing kind of an open source framework known as Sigma. This is basically a standard for writing detection rules. And so it can actually translate into a number of different specific tools like Splunk, Elasticsearch, et cetera. You write the detection in a standard format, and you can literally quickly convert it into other tools. And so my client was also using this on top of kind of those baseline detections provided by Splunk. So what we've done now is taking that original spreadsheet that I had, add in another column here with all of the roll-up of all the detections that are provided by the Sigma standard, also lined up with the MITRE ATT&CK techniques. And it continued to expand and expand from there, and it started to turn into something like this. So you can see on the left-hand side, it started with Splunk, we add in Sigma, and we just keep going and going. Everything that's included in this spreadsheet right now is publicly available open source data. We've got a range of specific network and endpoint related tools. There are lots of others out there that, no fault, choose not to publicize this information. So you could start to plug in, even your own data, and it just kind of keeps expanding from there. So at a certain point, I realized that I basically recreated the matrix, and I almost stopped there. Because that's what we're all trying to do in cybersecurity is basically create the matrix. So I almost stopped, but I decided to keep going. So I did the next most logical thing, which was to put it into an HTML and JavaScript web app. And that is what's included in this data set and tool that we've recently had the chance to produce. So here's the site. This takes you to the web app version of this. Everything, again, is publicly available. So the underlying data, that big spreadsheet that I just highlighted is there for you to utilize as well. The ideal scenario is for folks to go out and grab that data, fine-tune it for your own needs. You're likely not using both Splunk and Elastic and a third SIM. Some organizations may have multiple, but you're going to want to fine-tune that data to your own environment. So in that scenario, you're actually cutting out some of the columns. But I want to give just a moment to kind of walk through what this actually looks like. We do have a few features in here that hopefully make it a little bit easier to start putting that intelligence into place. So taking a high-level view at what's included here, again, we've got over 9,000 publicly accessible technical controls, these detection rules that I've been mentioning, also like policy controls as well. These are more just written format guidance in terms of what higher level like countermeasures or steps can you take, mostly from a policy and process perspective to better kind of prepare and guard your organization for these attacks. And then again, the part that I get really excited about is the fact that increasingly we're seeing more and more of these offensive security measures, literally like unit tests to go out and replicate adversary behavior, usually in a pretty safe way within your own environment. You're definitely going to want to do this in virtual environments, hopefully that mimic what's actually in the production. But a lot of this data is publicly available and increasingly actually being automated as well. The key part of this, again, is every single thing, every resource that's included in the control validation compass is lined up or tagged essentially with a MITRE ATT&CK technique or sub-technique, those most granular layers of it. So I'm gonna do the worst thing that I should do and try to do some of this live. So does anyone have a favorite MITRE attack technique that they'd like to kind of dig into a little bit? No worries. Obfuscating files, awesome. Thank you very much. All right, so we can do the search for the actual T code if you happen to know it, or let's just use a little bit more plain text. So we can talk about obfuscated files or information. Sounds pretty complicated. It's a fancy way of saying another way that attackers try to evade the defenses that we put into place by kind of messing with the file contents that would be available within your network. So when we search for this specific behavior or technique, we can see a number of different data points that all are lined up with this MITRE attack T code. So sticking at the high level, we've got this kind of policy and process related guidance. Every single one of these sources, we've got tons of kind of supporting resources around. I don't expect everyone to be familiar with probably even a fraction of the resources available here, but you can click in and learn a little bit more about what all these various data sets are trying to do. Scroll down a little bit further, we're talking now along the lines of the things that we were discussing earlier. So these SIM detection logics or rules that you could implement, and then some of the offensive security tests. What you can do from here, and this is actually brand new as of last week, is it kind of used to stop here. We would get a sense of which of these specific behaviors maybe have higher concentration of out-of-the-box rules available. What we can do now is pivot into just an additional resource that's all kind of included in the same GitHub repository. And this is taking us now directly to the specific, in this case, Sigma rules that we would be able to run all lined up with obfuscated files, that attacker technique. And so what you can see here is there is a very large number of them. This is kind of highlighting all these specific, what are known as implementations or procedures of that specific technique that could possibly exist. So again, takeaway here, this is good news. We have access to a lot of these. I can pivot directly in to, this is the rule as it's hosted on the Sigma repository. Scroll down and find the exact logic to run this test. But ultimately we're seeing that, again, even for this one technique, there are 74 detection rules that are available to detect all these different implementations of it. So we're probably ideally going to want to drill in a little bit further beyond that. So the way that you do that is to start using further intelligence. And I'm going to walk through really kind of one of my most common workflows for just starting to surface more relevant intelligence and kind of drill down to things that would be most interesting, most notable for a given organization, for example. And the way that I like to do that a lot is, I'm not going to walk through all the background steps in here. There's a ton of good resources. I'm going to share the slides. I've linked a ton of good walkthroughs on how to get to kind of the point that I'm showing on the screen. This is a tool published by the MITRE attack team that allows you to quickly surface kind of these heat maps of most notable techniques associated with specific adversaries, threat actor groups, or malware. This is called the Attack Navigator. What I'm highlighting here is you can search in plain text for a particular threat actor or malware group that you might find interesting. I'm taking a little bit of a jump ahead. One of the quickest ways, you're going to be reading a lot in the news about these various actor groups. Another big way of surfacing something that would be relevant to you is to look at what actors have targeted other organizations within your industry. This industry basis is really one of the most common ways that the clients I interact with are kind of going about this. But when we get to that point of identifying a specific adversary we want to dig into, that's where this tool comes in really handy. So what I've highlighted here is a very prominent, very popular malware known as TrickBot. Within the Navigator tool, you can kind of pivot through and highlight different, all the techniques that are known based on public observations to be associated with a given adversary group. So I've already highlighted all this within the Attack Navigator, highlighting specific techniques associated with TrickBot. What we can do from there is also utilize the tool, come over to this other page. We can export the data from Attack Navigator into just a pretty quick and easy JSON file, a very structured way of kind of transporting this threat intelligence. That's what this really is, what we're looking at here. Known observations of techniques associated with a threat. You can drop that into the tool here. I have the TrickBot example kind of preloaded into the system. Click Run. And now what we're seeing are the list of specific behaviors associated with that input file, and then all of the various kind of testing or detection rules, countermeasures associated with these specific techniques. So now we've gone from a standpoint of looking at relevant intelligence for our organization to these very kind of operational measures that we can take. Again, meaning detection rules you can run and test to make sure that they're actually working properly. So I actually, by default, this is sorted from low to high, meaning you would want to be, these are techniques for which there is not a lot of existing out-of-the-box, logic or detection rules that exist right now. So these are something that, probably manually, you're gonna wanna task some of your security engineers or threat hunters, if you have them, to try to find some kind of customized ways of detecting these techniques. It's not always gonna be possible, the way that certain techniques are defined, or it may not be very easy at least. But you can go that route, or if you don't have very much stuff in place right now, countermeasures, you can start with the things that have a ton of out-of-the-box mechanisms available right now, and that's sorted here. So you can sort kind of high to low with all of that, and again, pivoting in more and more into the data here. All right, I've got just a couple minutes left, so I will try to wrap things up. Definitely want to open it up to some questions. I think at a high level, some of the things that I've started to do with the tool is I've had the chance to publish some of my first Atomic Red Team scripts. So this is, again, a publicly available project. They highly encourage the community to contribute tests and examples to the project. What I did is I just came in and looked at one of these examples where we didn't have very many tests that were available right now. However, there are actually detection rules that existed for that technique, meaning it's telling you how you would be able to see this behavior within your own environment. All it came down to is simply putting it in the format for Atomic Red Team to be able to run that test in a more like kind of programmatic way. Also had the chance to dip my toes into actually producing Sigma rules recently. I wrote my first one on the basis of some of this intelligence. So looking at something on the inverse of what I just described, an example where lots of tests existed, so you could go out and actually run this in your environment, and then just figuring out basically how could I actually go about detecting that within a security tool. So at a much higher level, I think this is the thing that I'll kind of close out with here. Much higher level, I know the text is a little bit small. What we're seeing now is taking a huge step back and looking at these thousands of rules and tests that exist within the overall data set. Where are we seeing kind of concentrations or clustering on a myriad attack technique basis? So the outside wheel is showing that top row of the end goals of attackers. And now we're seeing where we're seeing clusters of detection rules versus these offensive security tests. So what this is basically kind of highlighting is, in this case, let's look at discovery. I know the colors are a little bit hard to see, but what we're saying here is that there are a relatively large amount of tests that you can go out and run to perform these discovery techniques. However, there's not an equivalent kind of proportion of detection rules. So maybe more for the community's sake, this is something that we would maybe want to increase. We would want to beef up the amount of detections that we have in place. Maybe they get publicized in something like the Sigma repository, or at least for your own knowledge, your awareness within your own environment, you would maybe want to focus in on the discovery techniques. This is not going to be easy. There's likely a reason why we see these distributions that we do. I think in this case, it's pretty easy to run one of these discovery techniques. It could be something as simple as just trying to search through your data in your system to see if files exist that you could go pull down. On the flip side of that, trying to detect that behavior and finding just the malicious instances of it is going to be pretty difficult to do, because these are all behaviors that everyday users are going to utilize as well. So I think there's reasons why we see the distributions we do, but I do also think it's really interesting. I've never quite seen a breakdown at this scale along these lines, so I figured we had the data available, why not kind of run this? And I'm going to try to get a visualization like this into the tool itself pretty soon, so you could toggle different tools and how they shake out. But that's a goal for this summer. So came right up on time. I apologize for that, but I'm all set. Definitely open to answering any questions, and thanks everyone for the time and attention. Any questions? All right, no worries. Oh, yeah, sorry. For sure. So let me quickly highlight the MITRE Defend tool. So this is an example of something that we have pretty detailed, pretty granular data in here for. I'll pivot out directly to the tool itself. So this is produced in conjunction with MITRE and the NSA. This is more, I like to kind of call them like higher level countermeasures or steps that you could take. It's a little bit more kind of policy and process based, but it actually does kind of divide that line. You have some very like technical operational countermeasures that you could try to put in place here. What they've done, this is purely kind of from a defensive perspective. What they've done though is mapped a lot of these, as they define them, countermeasures within the defend framework to attacker techniques. And so you could kind of try to line that up as well. So I'm not extremely actually well versed in operationalizing this data, but you can look at, file content rules. This is actually probably pretty similar to some of the examples that we walked through before. And it's telling, a process and policy that you could put into place, and then which specific attacker techniques would this kind of line up with, going back to the MITRE attack framework now. All right, thanks everyone.